Okay, so we're now recording. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. What I would like to do now is introduce our wonderful webinar today. So, exploring the voices of nature. This is the topic that we were lucky enough to co-create together, a group of us, as we were thinking about the kinds of arts program we wanted to design inside AILA's program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our own experiences inside AILA, designing an arts program that complements and strengthens a lot of really interesting work we do around law, economics, education, and broader governance. But before I do that, I would very much like to acknowledge country and give you an opportunity to stop for a moment and think about where on this beautiful continent or planet you reside. This lovely photo is of the Nudgee waterholes near where I live. I'm in Brisbane. I'm in a northern suburb called Banyo, and I can walk to these lovely places. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live, work and play, the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples of this amazing river city. And I always like to share that I was really delighted when I discovered that Nudgee waterholes, Nudgee is one of the old Aboriginal words and it means black duck. So it's black duck waterholes. And so I am working daily with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander connected friends, and we work on a whole range of caring for country and cross-cultural knowledge sharing programs. It's a great privilege. And I guess as an Australian who's a descendant of English and Irish folks, in addition to acknowledging country and paying my respects to elders and the next generation, I also like to acknowledge the impacts and ongoing legacy of colonisation. And a lot of our work is about addressing how we can be better earthlings and better Aussies on this beautiful continent of ours. So today's discussion, I'm going to kick off with an overview of Earth jurisprudence and the work of AILA that connects our desire to transform governance systems into an Earth-centered way of thinking and doing. And then I'm delighted to have James Lee, who also works with AILA. James will be talking about the role of the arts in the work that we do in AILA. Marion Drew is an internationally renowned photographer. And Marion has been collaborating with myself and with AILA for several years. So I'm looking forward to Marion's insights into constructing our national exhibition as part of Voices of Nature, but also so much of her other work, which is deeply collaborative. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And Leah Barclay, who is extremely famous for her incredible work and legacy in acoustic ecologies, wildlife recordings, and a whole range of other artistic installations and work. She's quite prolific. We're delighted she has time to join us. And it's been a great delight to work with Leah and the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology over the last 12 months or so as we've been brewing up ways to collaborate and work together. And at the very end, hopefully I'll have time for a short ad break where I can tell you all about the amazing upcoming Voices of Nature events. If our discussions wrap us up in love and happiness and we don't get there, please do visit the eartharts.org.au website and you'll see a little button for Voices of Nature. You'll see our public lecture series and all of the other things that we're getting up to. So please do connect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, particularly for folks who, I hope there's a number of folks on here who may be new to Earth jurisprudence, because it's always exciting to share with you some of the work we do. This dodgy photo is one that I've taken, and it's always, I was told by an old Aboriginal friend that whenever I give talks, I always forget to mention me. So I'm going to situate me in this talk today, which is quite an indulgence, I think. This is a photo I took on the Alice River out in Barcaldine. I grew up as a little country girl in a little town called Barcaldine, and that's where I guess I learnt the love of nature and really love big open spaces and the connections of plants and animals. I was always a bit of a bush kid and was always in love with animals. I often tell this story, but I think it's funny because my brother once declared vehemently in a family dinner, he was sick of watching David Attenborough documentaries with me because all I ever said through the whole thing was, oh, it's so cute. It's just so cute. So I think my love of the cute, my love of fairy things has definitely brought me to the place where I am. And although I grew up in Barkey, I was educated at the Australian National University, indoctrinated into the Western style way of thinking about law. Pleased to report, I always felt like an outsider. And as soon as I started professional work at the Federal Environment Agency way back in the 90s, I deserted law pretty quickly. I found it was constraining. It didn't bring joy or happiness to the work I did. I found my way back to law through earth laws and earth jurisprudence some 20 years later. And that's what I'll talk a little bit about. So to think about industrial society and to think about a starting point for Ayla's work, I'm not going to go into the doom and gloom of the kinds of situation we face on our planet today, but a nice starting point and perhaps a reminder about why the work that anyone does to care for country or to care for the earth is so important, is that in a nutshell, industrialized societies have completely failed to manage our relationship with the living world and with each other. Whether you look at growth economics or other points of triggering whatever's happened to us in the last few hundred years as a species, I think it's fair to say that we have brought ourselves to a place where life on Earth has been altered and changed and in many places destroyed forever. And that is certainly the starting point for my personal professional journey and also the work that the Australian Earth Laws Alliance is deeply passionate about. So again, I don't like to dwell on the numbers we see of the changing climate systems or the numbers of animals we've lost and the biodiversity threats and extinctions, because I think anyone on this call is probably already up with that. But the questions we ask when we're interested in things like law and government, and we're interested in how did we get here, is what can we do about it? And for us, this little slide reminds me to talk about the kinds of analysis that we do inside Ayla, the kinds of thinking we do as a think and do space. You need to ask, well, how did we get to this point where we have put the entire planet into a different sort of mode of being? And many people look at growth economics and neoliberalism from the 1980s. Others point to, rightly so, the Great Acceleration from the 1950s, which I'll talk about in a minute. But others point further back to the European Industrial Revolution, when a certain mode of extractivism became very much the norm and triggered by the colonization needs for more and more resources. I always like to make sure that particularly those of us from who are descended from people from Europe and have been settler or colonizing communities, we think about what it actually meant to be the kind of mindset in the late 1500s and 1600s that thought it was okay to go to other places of the world and use up the resources and try to control or dominate or use up the people. And it's that mindset, that growth extractivism idea, the expansionism idea, that has continued to drive what a lot of our dominant economic systems are doing to this very day. And if we don't really think about that and think about it in contrast with more steady state economies like First Nations peoples, it's a danger if we don't become aware of that endless need for whatever reason for this pocket of humanity that is then expanded across the planet to keep using up. And other people like Derek Jensen point further back to these notions of modernity and the beginnings of agricultural societies themselves. So however you think we got here or whatever you think we need to focus on to unpick the damage and put things back together, I think it's always really helpful to think about that. And it's certainly a nice jumping off point for the kinds of things that we think about and respond to and do inside of Ayla. I always like to show these two slides. I won't talk about them much, but if you've never seen them before, please have a peek online. This is by work done by Will Steffen and others. And they look at both Earth system trends, socioeconomic trends. And as you can see, the dotted line represents 1950. So the socioeconomic trends of population, GDP, urban population, energy use, water use, large dams, pretty telling. All we can see from the dots of 1950 is an exponential growth. We extract and what we use and what we pollute. And the flip side of that, of course, is that the Earth system trends are similarly escalating. The greenhouse gases that we release into the planet, the fish, the trees, everything that we take. And I love these two slides for one single reason. For anybody who thinks technology will save us, or for anybody who thinks that we actually are destroying aspects of ecosystems because we need to do it for human survival, it's pretty important to show that since the 1950s, it's not just human need, it's an excessive amount of extractivism that has been sort of stimulating our impact on the earth. We have seen consumption and production processes escalate to more than threefold population growth in some places. So human beings are needy. Yes, we are. We need material resources. Yes, we do. But there comes a time when we have to work out how much is enough. And I'll just leave it there. I find these slides very powerful and a good way to argue back to other people who think that maybe we can just keep doing what we're doing. And all I suggest with great humility and compassion is maybe we don't have to take as much as we take. Let's work out where it's all going, particularly in light of the fact that we have this social injustice as well, that a lot of the profits that come from certain things are not equally distributed. They're not meeting basic human needs. They're a whole lot more. So with all of that in mind, Ayla has been informed by and inspired by a theoretical framework that we find quite handy as Westerners pushing back at our own Western system. It's called Earth Jurisprudence or Earth Laws, and it's really all about shifting, examining the root causes of the current ecological and social crisis, and trying in all our best work to shift governance systems and thinking from a human-centered way of being, which is represented by the left, to an earth-centered or life-centered way of being on the right. I'm sure you've seen this image before. I like to joke that I stole it from Facebook. That's why there's no attribution. But the human-centered worldview is so deeply built into particularly the cultures that emerged out of Europe that it's actually very hard for some people to unravel. It's very hard for some people to look across a landscape and see that that living world is in fact equal to human beings. This idea that nature is just out there as human property has permeated every aspect of modern society. And what I'm really pleased and excited about is 60 years of environmentalism in the last 15 years of earth laws and rights of nature contributes into that movement of Westerners themselves or people in the globalized economies, realizing that this worldview is flawed and that our ideas of endless growth and endless extractivism is not only flawed, but it's deadly. So a big inspiration for Ayla's work is a book called The Great Work by Thomas Berry. He term Earth Jurisprudence, and if anyone's interested, I always recommend this book. It's just a really beautiful read, even though it's fairly depressing, but it gives a really nice, coherent framework for understanding these underpinning structures of industrialized society, why these modes of human-centered thinking and growth-focused obsession have caused the sort of structural issues that we have today. And it's by understanding these that you can then play a part in unpicking, unraveling, responding, challenging, and hopefully fixing up. Thomas Berry looks at these, what he calls the four fundamental establishments that control human affairs: law and government, economics, universities and education, and religion. I'm pleased to say we don't go near religion. What people believe is a whole nother area of work. But this book really triggered my thinking into how we design responses to these structural issues around law and economics and education. So I became exposed to these ideas in 2009 at a conference held in Adelaide, the first sort of wild law conference in Australia. And then a few of us got together, originally a bunch of environmental lawyers, but now Ayla has got people from all kinds of so-called disciplines. So Ayla was created formally in 2012. And what we're interested in is increasing the understanding and practical implementation of earth-centered governance, with a bit of a focus on law, economics, education, ethics, the role of the arts, and always with a view to collaborating deeply and closely with our First Nations colleagues. We're interested in systems change, and we are, by definition, whatever kind of multi-trans, cross-disciplinary definition you prefer. The primary focus of all of our work is how do we rearrange our relationship right now in these modern times with the living world? How can we care for and restore much of it? And how can we live within our ecological limits or planetary boundaries as they're often framed today? I won't read through all of these, but I've got written a few chapters which sort of give a brief analysis, very humble analysis of why we're doing what we do. We are worried about human-centeredness and this constant reinforcement in our economic and legal system that nature is nothing more than property, like furniture in a room to rearrange to human will. The pro-growth culture and economic system we've already talked about. But in Australia, we're also dealing with a particular kind of government and corporate control of both resources and information. And this is something I give a lot of workshops on, so I won't dwell on it now. We in the West have a fundamentally standardized approach to law. And rather than, like Aboriginal people had, a very localized, place-based, biophysically connected, respectful legal system that was to maintain life, our legal system's very top-down, so is our economic system in many ways. And there's a flawed sustainability model deeply embedded in even in our culture of trying to help. Sustainability has often been designed without any particular end game in mind. It was always about continual improvement. So a lot of the work that Ayla does is a response to all of these issues, looking at specific localized responses to bioregional changes, and then building a whole range of activities. So I'll talk about our arts projects in a moment, but I guess I just wanted to share that we have a very fluid framework for the work we do, and this is why the arts are so deeply important to our work. Creativity is a huge part of connecting human beings to the kinds of things that we love and are passionate about. It's not just an added interest at the end or window dressing. One of our 5 core themes of work is around changing culture, and that comes from helping people think differently, but it also comes from helping human beings accept the fully rounded being that they are. I can speak with great experience that certain professions and disciplines that have been constructed in Western knowledge, like law, tend to try to suck the very life out of your brain and put you into this rational mode, this so-called professional mode. And it's really lovely. Writers like Cormac Cullinan in his book Wild Law said, we really need to bring our whole selves to the party if we're going to be part of the solution that reconnects westernized or globalized systems and localized people, if we reconnect our governance to what really matters. That is a splattering to show you how all of our different programs fit around those themes. We're very fluid, as I said. We have nearly 30 volunteers who come and go as time permits in amongst their other lives. And we have people who work across multidisciplinary projects, as well as people working in a specific field of knowledge. We have auspiced a number of initiatives, including the Australian Centre for the Rights of Nature, the Australian People's Tribunal, and both of these are heavily involved in our Voices of Nature program. But I also wanted to mention Future Dreaming, which is an organisation that we've been building with a number of Indigenous elders. And I'm very proud to say that over the last 4 years, Ayla has auspiced with now thousands of other people, but dozens of committed advocates, the New Economy Network, Australia, or NINA. And that's one of our strategies to push back at the current economic system and show that the economic system that's built right now is not good for people or planet. And there's so many other wonderful creative ways to respond to what we've been doing. That is my formal talk. And now I just wanted to quickly show you some of the Voices of Nature work. So I'll just quickly jump back in. So the reason it was important for me to be able to share with you the foundations of Earth jurisprudence is that in exploring the voices of nature, it's actually very important to realize that Western industrialized systems, and particularly the legal system, has effectively silenced nature. In human governance systems in Australia, nature is nothing more than an object to be moved around to our will. We have no formal structures in Australia for eco-representation. We have no cultural ingrained ways of listening to nature and hearing what nature might actually want in a scenario. We have managed to achieve, I think, what the colonial powers always set out to achieve, which is domination of a landscape and of other peoples. So the reason that the arts program, and particularly this year's Voices of Nature program, is really important and personally very, very exciting to me, is that it is by definition themed around how can we explore the ideas of nature's agency, the voice of nature, inside these human governance systems. So I'm just going to share screen one more time, and then I'll stop rabbiting on and hand over. But for those who haven't seen our website, I guess I just wanted to show you that the Voices of Nature program has a range of activities. And what we do every 2 years is we bring our ongoing arts community together to focus on what we call our Rights of Nature Week, which this year is the 12th to the 17th of October. And the Voices of Nature program came from an idea that James and I were talking about last year, and James can talk hopefully about his own amazing career with music and other acoustic related interests. And he and I were thinking about how we could amazing people like Leah and others in AFAE into the work that we do to broaden it out. So all I'll do then to introduce, I guess, the themes. You'll see that on that website, we've got a virtual gallery. If any of you would like to share your artworks or film output on our little website, that'd be awesome. So Voices of Nature is about concepts of voice and standing, representation and agency in the natural world. And the reason there's a beautiful crossover is that by definition, rights of nature is literally about having legal standing and legal rights that see the living world. One way to think about it is in our current Western legal system, if you could see what the legal system sees, it sees people and it sees these big giant blobs called corporations and incorporated entities, but everything else is just like brown clunky boxes of nothing. When you put the rights of nature across the law system, you change the way it sees the world, and it actually suddenly sees all of the living world as having a legal right, as a rights-bearing entity to be heard, to have a right to live, to have a right to exist and a right to habitat. So that's the Voices of Nature. I'm going to leave it to my other wonderful artist colleagues to explain all the various elements of it. But as the co-founder of AILA and as a lawyer and governance nerd, for me, the whole point of our culture, arts or creatives program, whatever you would prefer to call it, is to not just have something pretty to show during a conference. It's actually to bring and I guess extend an invitation to all people who are all creatives to bring the best of you into this space about how we heal and how do we repair and how do we change the relationship that our societies as a whole have with the living world. So I think that's probably all I wanted to say. I'm going to try and hand over to James, but there's so many lovely faces looking back at me, I can't find him. There he is. Okay, so I thank you for your time and attention. I'm really grateful to have the chance to share our love and passion about Earth jurisprudence with you all. And now for the connecting points between that broader vision of having the arts infused into our solutions and I guess creative work, I'll hand over to James, who helps with the curation of our arts program. And then when he's finished, I'll hand over to Marion and Leah. Now, James, do you have an idea of how long you'd like to chat and whether you want me to keep time for you?
It's only going to be brief, just 5-ish minutes.
Over to you then, my darling.
If I can. Is that visible?
Yes, it looks wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's fantastic to see so many people on the webinar. I'd like to also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Turrbal and Yagara people. I'm also up in Brisbane as well. And a little quick bit about me is that I came to AILA in 2016 while I was doing my Masters of Environmental Management, and I was looked at a project on arts-informed environmental governance. So it was really looking at the ways in which arts practices can be used by communities through participatory art or public art or community art as a way for generating ideas around governance, democracy, how people want to see their environments managed or treated, or and how they want to relate with the environments in which they live. My background is actually in music, so I originally have a Bachelor of Music playing cello and composing, and I took that through film and TV, and then logically went to environmental management after that, which is how I've ended up here. So Michelle very, very nicely has led into a few things I'm going to talk about. So particularly this first slide. So I'll just read this if I can move the pictures. So art is familiar to most people as a source of entertainment, illustration, decoration. It is less familiar as a knowledge system and source of creative options that take equal place with other forms of systems theory and modeling. So I really love this little quote, because as Michelle was saying, we're looking at the arts not as a kind of a decorative addition or a something that's just purely aesthetic, even though it can be, and there's no problem with that. But we love to sort of delve further into it, particularly because Ayla deals with a lot of systems thinking, holistic thinking, and trying to get away from these siloed solutions of, we're presented with a techno fix, we're just going to have a new technology that will fix climate change, or an economic fix or something like that. We actually think, it's much broader than that, and it incorporates a lot of social and cultural dimensions that are a lot more complicated to negotiate than simple technical. I mean, technical solutions are also complicated, but there's an order of complication added by adding the social systems, and it's only with those social cultural systems moving that change is really going to happen. So this statement is central to artistic investigations of particularly of environmental relationships, because the arts engage with more than just, for example, the scientific data, and it takes a more than rational approach, exploring stories, emotions, our sense of place, and relationships with the non-human world. And I'll just also mention there's a jazz musician and education theorist called Donald Shern, who in the 80s talked about artful doing. And I also love that process, because it talks about this process of doing something, reflecting on what you've done, doing it again, reflecting on it again. And this is sort of like a process of practical artistic research. And so artful doing then, in a way, becomes, shows that art is more than just a finished product, or a final physical item that's on display. It's actually a process of getting to that point and then going from that point and reflecting on that. And I think, and so this engages all these other modes of understanding. So our improvising, spontaneity, intuition, and tackling uncertainty and complexity as well. I think that's a really important part of what the arts can do, particularly with engaging with contradictions as well. So the next slide. So this is a little art piece I did for the project I did with Ayla, and it's really looking at I guess breaking down, as Michelle was saying, there's so many of these kind of siloed disciplines that want you to think in a rational, fixed way, and so these are Boolean search kind of criterias of it's either A or B, or it's A and B, and all of that. But it's actually when we get into the arts, we're actually starting to sit with these contradictions where A can be B and not B at the same time, and all these kind of things. So we start moving away from what is like a lot of binary reductive thinking, or an over-reliance on kind of technical, individualistic, competitive, allegedly value-free scientific kind of processes, which have all led to the great acceleration that we're living in. So, and the wonderful thing about sitting with contradiction is this idea that you can suspend that rational impulse that's almost driven by anxiety, that needs certainty, that sort of charges in and goes, we need a fixed solution to this. So being able to sit in an artistic experience or through a personal artistic journey with those contradictions just allows space for different knowledge, different experiences, different ideas to connect in different ways. And I think that's really special with addressing the holistic issues that we're dealing with. And then, so a couple of examples from around the world quickly. There's an example in Chicago called Slow Cleanup, and they've basically taken an artist, put her in the planning department, and she's then worked with them to remediate old gas stations. And like there are hundreds of old gas stations across Chicago. And she worked with local communities to create these kind of science lab phytoremediation areas. So using plants to then draw the toxins out of the soil. And so it becomes a kind of a long process, an experiment in terms of what plants work best, a community engagement project where communities get to be involved in the redevelopment of these areas. And so this is vastly different from a lot of the standard procedures, which is just cut all the toxic soil out, dump it somewhere else or burn it, and just leave the site and wait for it to, remediate. So that's an amazing project. 0 Degrees as well is also looking at, it's a project run in the Arctic Circle, and it's looking at thresholds. And so 0 degrees Celsius being the point at which ice melts and becomes water. Using this as a reference point is different from when dealing with climate change, is different from looking at the tipping points we're presented with, like the 1.5 degrees by the IPCC, or the 2 degrees that they say is the threshold that we're trying to keep under. This is sort of taking it from a different point of view and saying, well, actually 0 degrees is the point at which these physical changes happen in our environment in terms of, ice melt and permafrost melt and all of that. And so that engaged artists and scientists to think about things just from this different perspective and come up with different ideas and artworks and reflections on that kind of a thing. So just quickly then, what we have, which you'll find on our website as well. So we have these provocations for our arts program. And on the left side, you'll sort of see there's this idea of critiquing what is there, which Michelle has talked about in terms of the way the law sees the environment just as property and as objects and just generic things that belong to other people. And then on the right side, we're looking at how could this be different? Where do we start with looking at this in a different way? And that's where we're really engaging with the voices of nature, the agency of nature, our relationship with nature, and its rights, and just all of that kind of cultural and social experience of nature. I have a last slide, but I think I've actually covered everything that I was going to talk about. So I will hand it back to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, James. That was lovely. Very thought-provoking. And I always love that slide that shows the funky ways that we can be a bit more creative and less binary. So thank you very much. So Marion, I'd now like to introduce Marion Drew, who has been helping with a whole range of activities across Ayla's work for many, many years. Marion, are you able to unmute yourself, or would you like me to do it?
No, I can do it. I'm done.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Over to you, my dear.
Okay. Well, yes, it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be with so many other people of so many different disciplines. I think, for me, I'll just introduce myself quickly. I've been an artist for 30 years, and I've worked mostly in photography, video. I've taught at the art school in Brisbane at the Queensland College of Art for 30 years. I'm an adjunct associate professor at Griffith University. But most importantly, I met Michelle, and when we started working together, there was scientists and social scientists, climate change scientists, and Michelle's a lawyer, and it was that bringing together of those diverse disciplines under this topic, under this question of what can we do about climate change, and we were working on and it was called the climates that art can change. I think that's it. But I personally arrived, in this work with a feeling of helplessness in that, what can I do as an individual? And I suppose that started 15, 20 years ago when I started picking up roadkill that seemed to be just unnoticed, and I started making artworks, making beautiful pictures with these beautiful dead animals. And I've come to realize more and more that one individual can do quite a lot, but I think as a group, and this type of group that we're in right this morning is a real indicator of what's happening, and this coming together of different perspectives is making things really much stronger in terms of how we can put this holistic problem together and help people and help ourselves, create a cultural change. So I've been working with the Rona 20 National Exhibition, trying to do my part. I'm actually in lockdown in Victoria, so I'm speaking to you from Victoria. This, obviously, the pandemic has made everything this year change and, create new problems for what was planned. So I'm working on that exhibition from interstate. And I'm going to share my screen and show you some of the works that we are planning for. Where are we? Planning for, has that got my screen there? Yes, it does look terribly messy. Planning for the National Exhibition in Brisbane. So the space that we're working in Brisbane is a sort of an industrial space. It's a multifunction space. And we felt that was a really kind of a perfect site for bringing together, works, acoustic works. There's a whole diversity of artists that are involved. There's poetry, and we were going to have more performances. That seeming much more difficult with the pandemic. So we've got audio visuals and a range of visual arts. This first, I'll just run through some of the artists, and then we can have some questions afterwards. Vicky Hallett is an artist that went to Africa in 2017, and she plays a flute to a group of hippos in the river. And during this beautiful, the voices of the natural world are around and participating in this, eerie sound, and the hippos come out and give her a nod a few times, and seem to really be acknowledging her presence, and this sort of creates a beautiful interaction. So we'll be showing that as an audio visual. There's a group of artists that Leah Barclay is a member of, and Leah will be talking soon, and Renata Buziak is a visual artist, and Tanja Brueggemann is a composer from Austria, and Vic Kelleher is a spoken word artist, and of course Leah herself. And their work came out of a conversation with, terribly paraphrasing Leah right here, but a conversation with Gungari elders, which are part of the Queensland's Maranoa region. And it's a fabulous interdisciplinary project that brings together sort of sound recordings, photo media. This work you're looking at here is a work by Renata Buziak in process, and it's over time the plants rot, and she records this rotting process, which is really kind of mesmerizing and beautiful as it decays, and the microbes create these colors and forms like shadows in the photographic material that she rots them on. And so it'll be a surround sort of installation work where there'll be a projection of the work and audio recordings and spoken word. That'll be a very holistic experience. And I think, you know, it really reminds us that, you know, the experience of art is through the whole body, you know, ideally through the body, and it engages not only the head, but the heart and the spirit. Peter Cameron is a Sydney artist, and he's been going to Lake Mungo, you know, repeatedly, and it's this site that he's become deeply connected to, and he's creates these paintings. And I liked the way he talked about the way the painting might travel back and forth, asking different questions about how best to communicate with this specific land and its nature, and this sort of humble, you know, there's not this sort of authority of the artist as, you know, the author, that there's this participation between the land and the listening and the materials, often using materials and colours and things from the landscape itself. So he'll have a couple of paintings, God willing, if we get them up from Sydney. Alita Ledovash has been making these watercolours which integrate the human form with, you know, this one's called Man Eucalypt, and she'll have a series of watercolours based on these ideas of this human nature integration. Kay Lawrence, Dr. Kay Lawrence is a Brisbane artist with this Sound of Coral Crying sculpture, which she's collaborated with an acoustic ecologist, and I haven't got the name, where there is a sound work in response to the building up of this form, which I believe the form was arrived at through sort of graphs of sound as well. So it's sort of picking up on sort of scientific you know, data or information and reforming it into a sort of a visual form. Michelle England is an artist from Canberra. She's working on her master's, and she's making some drawings, and they'll be part of the national exhibition. And I don't know what else to say then. Vivian Glantz and Sophie Minasali, they're a collaborative team. This work is already on the virtual gallery. I'm not sure whether it can get into the national show, just depending on equipment and installation issues. But it's this collaboration between spoken word and still images. Meretta McGarity is a Brisbane artist, and her human-sized sculptures will be in the exhibition. She uses found forms and to create these kind of figures, a sort of a parliament of figures. It's called the Grand Negotiations. And she's been able to collaborate with a wildlife recorder, Tony Bayliss, and they've created a soundtrack which will go with these. So a lot of the works, well, the whole environment will be completely immersive, and you'll slip from one thing to another, and soundtracks will possibly overlap. If you know, which I think could be a great thing. It's not about control; it's about sort of a bit of chance and serendipity as well, is always welcome. Aviva Reid is in Melbourne. Aviva's a ecologist, transdisciplinary ecologist working through the arts and sciences, and her work is, she often does collaborative drawings, and she's been working with the Victorian volcanic plains, which is there's only a small residue of grasslands left in Victoria. 99% have been destroyed. So she's drawing a highlight and attention to these rich historical and ecological spaces. And what's interesting too with Aviva's work is that it's very important for her to have, you know, the artwork doesn't sit by itself, that it has these other connected networks of information, so that it's a portal to take you further into finding out more, depending on, you know, how much time you have or how much level of interest. So it's a sort of a, you know, it's a very porous membrane into the sciences and the arts, and I think generally, you know, I hope that art is a portal to questioning, to asking people ultimately to question. I should just stop sharing. Just to ask people to question, you know, what's in front of them, what's framing that object that they might be seeing, and then you take that exercise of perception back with you to your everyday life. And I think that's kind of, yeah, that's probably all I have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. That's the first time I've seen some of the photos too of some of the artwork. So I enjoyed that. I hope others did too, but I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for, you know, working with everyone and collecting and curating. It's so exciting. I can't wait. Opening night will be Wednesday, the 14th of October. So if you are in Brisbane or can come to Brisbane, please join us. It will be a rare opportunity to go out in the world and be together. We're 50 people in the space. So yeah, and there's a booking page there. So thank you, Marion. And now I'm also super excited to introduce Leah Barclay. Leah is known by anybody in Australia who's involved with the sort of acoustic ecology world, and she seems to be everywhere at once. So we're thrilled that she's here at One Dimension right now. So I'm going to hand over to you, Leah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and fascinating to hear all those presentations as well. It's a really exciting collaboration and partnership this year, and you know, I'm basically going to talk, I guess, quite broadly about acoustic ecology and introduce some of the possibilities of I guess the artistic and scientific possibilities of listening to nature. So I'm here, I guess, wearing my Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology hat today, and I guess as the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology, you know, we've been really interested for many years in broadening our collaborations and our opportunities to really have impact across different sectors. So it's been a great privilege to collaborate on the Voices of Nature program this year and really look at the possibilities of acoustic ecology across a whole range of sectors as well. And I think, you know, the more we enter this period of environmental crisis, the more it becomes so prevalent that collaboration and interdisciplinarity is such a critical way forward for the future. So I'm going to screen share from a different laptop just so I can, oh, the host has disabled screen sharing. I might need you to put screen sharing on my account, Michelle. No, Michelle's gone. Have you got host access, James?
I
Sorry.
do.
Sorry, Leah. Just had
Have I got screen sharing now? No, I've still got disabled screen sharing.
Okay, I will try again. I actually did create, oh, are you on a different computer to the one you logged in on?
Yeah, so the other Leah Barclay account.
Sorry, darling. Yep.
You're right.
Sorry. I actually had a phone call from someone who was trying to access this webinar whilst webinar. So give me 1 second. Make co-host. Sorry, love. I'm just trying to find your second Leah. Hang on.
Too many.
Sorry, folks. Please contemplate some beautiful artworks while we wait. There we are. Sorry about that, Leah.
That's all good. No worries at all.
You should be right now.
I am right now. Fantastic. All right. So I guess I just wanted to start broadly. I mean, we've covered this basis through the other presentations as well, but we're certainly at this point where we urgently need better ways to understand what's happening on the planet and to respond to it in real time. Find better ways to bring people together and really facilitate these collaborations. This sense of urgency is so important right now, and to find these interdisciplinary tools where we can bring people together. And so this idea of listening to the environment, connecting with these ecosystems in an embodied way, and really looking at the artistic and the scientific possibilities of listening to nature, what we can learn by listening from monitoring these systems from an environmental perspective, but what we can really learn by having these embodied connections with the environment. And literally every acoustic ecology workshop I've had the opportunity to facilitate or be part of, it's always such a revealing experience for people to be immersed in these ecosystems and connect with this opportunity to listen and understand environments in new ways. And this idea of acoustic ecology has been around for many, many years, initiated in the 1970s and really driven by the vision of R. Murray Schafer in looking at ways that we can explore the social, cultural and ecological context of our environment through sound, and really bringing a wide attention and awareness to the impact of anthropogenic noise in our environment and our ecosystems, and the importance of listening and the impact of sound on our health and well-being as humans and non-humans as well. And that's really the foundation of the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, which has affiliate organisations across the planet. And here in Australia, at the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology, we have members across the country who have all been involved in this sort of field of sound in different ways. We have architects and engineers who have come to acoustic ecology from the perspective of wanting to get a deeper understanding of the value of sound in their practice. We work with landscape designers and urban planners in trying to understand the impact of sound in urban places, and of course scientists who are now deeply embedded in sound as a tool for environmental awareness and engagement. But the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology and the majority of our current members and our board are really comprised of artists, sound artists, designers, visual artists as well, who are truly passionate about the value of sound. And if you want to get a really good sense of what's been happening with the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology and sort of what's brought us to this collaboration with Voices of Nature and working with Ayla this year, I would really encourage you to read some of the articles in this journal, which is sitting on the front page of our website. And this is essentially celebrating 20 years of acoustic ecology in Australia. Well, of course, acoustic ecology was active for many, many years before that. But this is basically capturing a perspective on some of the really prevalent practitioners and projects that have happened over the last 20 years. Many artists who are participating in the program this year, including people like Andrew Skiok, who we're going to hear from in the next lecture, Ros Bant, Vicky Hallett, and Vanessa Tomlinson, who has a wonderful article about her practice in this journal as well. As an example of one of the projects that we've been involved in as the AFAE recently, and an example of how acoustic ecology can really be a tool to connect us in different parts of the planet. For International Dawn Chorus Day this year, we participated and collaborated on a project called Reveille, which is led by Soundcamp in London. And this is essentially tracking the dawn chorus across the entire planet in real time. So a 24-hour continuous live stream, like a live broadcast, a radio broadcast, but jumping from microphone to microphone. So over 200 open microphones participating across the planet, and getting a sense of what dawn chorus sounds like in ecosystems across the planet. So listening to these voices of nature in real time and connecting to these different ecosystems. And of course, in May this year, you know, a large majority of the world was in complete lockdown with the impacts of COVID-19. So it became this quite unusual opportunity to hear these soundscapes like they had never been in the last 40 years. So with less boats in the ocean, planes in the sky, cars on the roads, this reduction in anthropogenic noise really allowed these voices of nature to come to the forefront. So an example of one of the projects that the AFAE has sort of been involved in with that international acoustiecology movement as well. So just to give a broad snapshot, when we're talking about acoustiecology, I haven't actually, I guess, given that definition of where we're sitting internationally at the moment. I guess for me, you know, acoustiecology is a very interdisciplinary field. And at the AFAE, we really describe it as that intersection between art and science. So this is a pretty wild slide connecting all of those different interdisciplinary possibilities, but we're really looking at how we can understand the social, cultural, and ecological context of our sonic environment through sound, how sound can be a tool for activism and agency in the environment, and how we can sort of combine these different sonic disciplines from, you know, Pauline Oliveira's perspective of deep listening, you know, listening in every possible way to everything that's around us. Obviously, perspectives on deep listening from Indigenous knowledge systems in Australia, like Dadiri, that whole body listening, to Stephen Feld's perspective of acousticology, you know, sound as a distinctive medium for knowing the world. So these artistic and cultural perspectives on sound as a tool for agency in the environment, all the way to the other spectrum, to where we're seeing this rapid advancement of sound as a tool for environmental monitoring and measuring environmental health. So we really, in Australia, look at acoustiecology as the umbrella field for all of these exciting possibilities that are evolving in sound at the moment. And, you know, when we think, I guess, very broadly about what's happening in the environment, you know, Bernie Krause, who's one of the pioneers of soundscape ecology as well, often uses this quote that, you know, if we say an image is worth 1,000 words, then we could say a soundscape is worth 1,000 images. You know, we look at this image and we can't exactly see what's happening in this ecosystem. We don't know what's living there. We don't know how many species are living there. But now we're at the point where we have these acoustic monitoring devices that we can install in a rainforest like this, and we can be mapping these voices of nature in real time. We can be accessing that data in real time across the planet through these live streams, and putting these devices in the hands of communities where they actually have the agency to monitor and manage these projects. And what's, I guess, been really inspiring in the last few years as well is these devices have become so increasingly accessible and affordable. An example of an audio moth here, you know, just $25, and runs on AA batteries and can be put in the hands of community members in the central Amazon rainforest and be mapping these changing soundscapes. And these soundscapes can then obviously be used in the context of these artistic and cultural engagement projects across the planet as well. And that's very much been the foundation through projects like Biosphere Soundscapes, working directly with UNESCO, using sound as a tool to really bring attention and awareness to what's happening in these remote ecosystems. So we've seen examples more recently where recordings from devices like this have actually been used in court to prove that things like illegal chainsaws have been used in parts of the Amazon rainforest. So we're now seeing plenty of examples where sound is truly working at that intersection of art, science, technology, and law, which is very exciting to see. And, you know, when we talk about what we're actually listening to in the environment, you know, obviously we might be quite familiar with the sounds of terrestrial ecosystems. We hear the call of particular species of birds. We might not know what species that is, but we can certainly recognize it and identify it as a bird, for example. But, you know, there's this whole world of sound above and below our spectrum. And every week at the moment, we're seeing new acoustic ecology research published that is really revealing how critical this world of sound beyond our perception really is, and this evolution that's happening across the planet in different species. As just one really simple example, you know, if we think about the ultrasonic soundscape, so sounds that are above our hearing range, many species such as bats, you know, will use echolocation. So we'll use these high frequency ultrasonic sounds to navigate and find food essentially at night. And, you know, as an example of this sort of sonic evolution, a particular species of moth have actually developed an acoustic camouflage. So they've actually evolved to develop this camouflage on their wings that is mitigating that sound, that ultrasonic sound that microbats are using to find them. So, you know, one very simple example, and like I said, there's examples that are literally being published every week or every couple of weeks at the moment, revealing more and more how critical sound is in our environments. And, you know, again, we're probably very familiar with the sounds of something like a humpback whale and perhaps also the sound of dolphins. But it's interesting when we think about these marine environments, you know, we often have that narrative that listening underwater is this sort of peaceful and relaxing experience. But I mean, it couldn't really be further from the truth when when aquatic environments, are truly acoustic environments. These are ecosystems where, you know, species like humpback whales and different cetaceans are literally reliant on sound to communicate and survive. This is, you know, truly an acoustic environment, and we're seeing the impact of anthropogenic noise in our marine environments so prevalently across the world at the moment. And it's such a critical time to be listening to nature underwater as well. And I just wanted to give a brief snapshot, you know, thinking about these aquatic ecosystems. If we're very familiar with the sounds of things like whales and dolphins, we might not traditionally think about rivers, for example, as places that would be sonic environments. But, you know, these are truly acoustic environments as well, full of sound, and sound that we can use to monitor the health of the environment. And I just threw in this image as Michelle was talking earlier about this idea of, you know, ecosystems having a voice and, you know, being able to think about environments having agency in some of these conversations. And we're seeing, you know, multiple examples of rivers in different parts of the world being recognized with personhood now, which is such an exciting concept. And I've been really privileged to work with people like Anne Paulina on the Fitzroy River with the pioneering work that she's doing over there. But this image here we're looking at is of the Narmada River in North India. And this was a river that I worked with about 10 years ago now. And it was one of the first times where I was sort of quite confronted by this idea of the agency of a river and the role that rivers were really playing as the lifeblood of communities. So I was working directly with communities who have been impacted by the Narmada dams in North India. And, you know, they were talking about this river in sound, this idea that the dam had actually silenced the river. And so, you know, when we put the hydrophones in the water, you know, they said this river, you know, it used to be full of sound and it used to sing, and it's been silenced by the dam. And it was, I guess, this project that was a really big turning point in how I was thinking about acoustic ecology and how many people on this project were thinking about acoustic ecology, that it wasn't just about, you know, listening to the environment. It was about kind of listening with the environment and using these sounds as a tool for activism, for engagement, and, you know, truly diving into the scientific possibilities of this as well. So this was, I guess, the project that led into this world of trying to find these intersections of science and art when we're actually listening to rivers. And it's hydrophones, these underwater microphones, that have really facilitated this process through a lot of the river work. And there's many pioneering artists in Australia and overseas who are doing very like-minded work in this space at the moment, which is really exciting. And I've been super privileged to work with different river systems across the planet and understand what these sounds can potentially mean, you know, to the health of the environment. And when we look at a, you know, surface of a river, we literally have no idea what that voice of the river system is by looking at the surface. These sort of impacts of climate change in terrestrial environments are visible and they're audible as well. But when we talk about these dramatic changes that are happening in acoustic ecosystems, you know, so much of it is truly going unnoticed. And these, you know, still very traditional techniques that are used today are incredibly invasive in the environment and not really that realistic either. They're not capturing accurate information, things like electrofishing and capture and release. So again, you know, we can use these sounds, this voice of nature beneath the surface of the water, to understand what's actually living in this ecosystem. And, you know, like a terrestrial environment, all of these species living in rivers have very distinctive sounds as well. I'm just going to play you a couple of examples, and I may just have to stop screen sharing for a second just so I can share audio properly. It's not what I meant to do. Sorry, 1 second.
You're all right. I'm quite certain that buttons move around when you're on a Zoom call. Where they are.
It's all good. Yeah, I'm just trying to get the audio to come through properly. 1 second, it should work now. I don't think that audio is coming through, is it?
No. James, if I've made you co-host, you should be able to share sound. But I do recall there's a special button you have to press sometimes.
It's all right. It is sharing from here, but it's not coming through for some reason. But that's all right. I can just keep talking and I'll share the sound in links afterwards. That's all right.
Okay. Thanks, Leah.
Let me just jump back to that. Right. That should work again now. Yes. Okay. So what we would be hearing is those different species of fish and aquatic insects, but I'll share those links in the chat so you can have a listen to them afterwards. And I won't play this video right now, but this was basically an example of essentially the voice of some of the river systems that I was using as examples, talking about this idea of the voice of rivers changing very dramatically throughout the day as well. So thinking about, you know, when we have a dawn chorus in a terrestrial ecosystem, in a rainforest, that we also have that same experience of a dawn chorus on a place like the Great Barrier Reef, or a river system like the one we're looking at right now, which is the Mary River, not far from where I am, which has been one of the main sites where we've been doing a lot of these acoustic explorations of river systems. And I guess one of the really important things that sort of come out in this acoustic ecology research, where we've been exploring environments in different ways, is really, I guess, pushing the possibilities of that interdisciplinarity and making sure that scientists are engaged at every step of the way so they can really help us push this research and validate it to a point where it can become standardized monitoring tools and it can become part of legislation as well. So that's been a really important part of the research and the work that we really push through the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology. And just as an example, I wanted to mention this broadly when we're talking about, you know, across the planet creating these acoustic databases that are made up of, you know, terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of sound. I mean, I could never listen to all the sound that I've recorded in my lifetime. I've just got, you know, hours and hours and hours and probably years of sound at this point. So, you know, we do use different visualization techniques to be able to identify species in these recordings. And as a simple example, if we look at something like this visualization of a 24-hour recording here, this tells us absolutely nothing about what's happening in that environment. We wouldn't know what species are there. We wouldn't know what those sounds are. So one of the really important things that the global acoustic ecology community has been engaged in more recently is this idea of creating different visualizations of sound where we can recognize those voices and where we can really create these immersive artistic experiences with the visualizations, but use that as a tool to bring a wider awareness to what's happening in these environments. As one example, this is some of our river recordings that I won't talk about, but I love to use this example. This is a false color spectrogram technique created by Michael Towsey, who's an academic at QUT, who's developed some really innovative ecoacoustic visualization tools. And what we're looking at in this example here is essentially 44 days of continuous data. So you can see down the side of the screen, we can kind of see 1 to 44, these ribbons of sound. So these spectrograms that are essentially layered on top of each other. What we're looking at here is marine recordings, so hydrophone recordings off the coast of Georgia in the USA. And this is a breeding ground for North Atlantic right whales. And at this particular place, this was where the government, the USA government, had basically said that in this breeding ground, there was no impact of anthropogenic noise. So there was no harm in having a distant shipping lane where it was, because the whales essentially could not hear it. They would not be able to sense these sounds of passing ships. And what we see in this visualization is basically every red bump you can see in this spectrogram. Every time you see red, that is the sound of one of these passing ships. And when we look at each of these ribbons being a 24-hour recording, this is obviously telling us that in these 44 days, there is a huge amount of anthropogenic noise impact in this environment. So just a very simple visualization is giving us access to this 44 days of very complex acoustic data, and is telling us, you know, this acoustic information is telling us that this is having a significant impact. And what I really like about this, I guess, intersection of art and science in the context of a lot of the visualization work that's happening around voices of nature at the moment as well, is it's very accessible. You know, we use these spectrograms with young children in acoustic ecology workshops, and they'll immediately understand what's happening in this image and immediately describe the kind of impact and how it makes them feel to think about the impact of these shipping sounds as well. So that's one example. And, you know, again, on that point, I guess as much as so much work around acoustic ecology is really happening with experimental and new science and quite experimental approaches to sound art and sound design as well. For the AFAE and the kind of acoustic ecology work that we've been engaged with in Australia, it's been really critical to make it as accessible as possible for the next generation and create these models where, you know, students can come and do things like make a hydrophone in the morning and put those hydrophones in the water in the afternoon and be recording those soundscapes and understanding and editing the sounds from their own perspective as well. And then just to quickly finish off with, all of these sounds then become part of these artistic and creative experiences, embodied ways to engage with this environment, whether it's sound walks along wetlands and river systems where people can connect back to these sounds that they don't traditionally have access to, live performances in concert halls, or work that's delivered online. And just to finish off with a work that we recently did collaboratively for Horizon Festival with Lyndon Davis, Gubby Gubby Songman, and Trisha King, who took the photos for this project, which was looking at how we can have these remote experiences, basically listening to the voices of nature at home. So creating this transient, immersive, and live stream of an ecosystem and actually bringing it into people's homes, which was, of course, partly in response to COVID as well, being able to access these environments from our home and still connect to these ecosystems. And, you know, as one example for this experience, which I'd encourage you to listen to, you know, we said we would close with some sound, but instead of playing it, I'll share the link in the chat and you're welcome to listen to it afterwards. This is the Maroochy River on Queensland with Lyndon Davis, who is actually playing didgeridoo into the surface of the water. And, you know, the Maroochy River, this kind of stunning environment, and with the hydrophones sitting in the riverbank, the sound of the didgeridoo was actually resonating through this mangrove mud. So it created this, I guess, really rich and textured recording of the river, but quite fascinating to think that it was very much the voice of this river system that was coming through in this recording. And in the live stream, you know, you can hear Lyndon talking about Gubby Gubby stories of the Maroochy River, layered with the sound of the river itself. So these live streams were really about giving these ecosystems agency and bringing these soundscapes that we don't traditionally have access to the surface. And like I said, you know, it's really important for us that these projects are accessible for young people. And I'll just close by saying that one of the exciting things that we sort of made the connections around with the partnership between the AFAE and AILA this year was also looking at working with an organisation called Feral Arts and Arts Front. And so there's a platform that's been set up for Voices of Nature this year, where you can participate in various ways, including, you know, uploading sound from your own back garden to the sound map, or participating and engaging with some of the artists, listening to sound and editing sound, creating your own compositions, and engaging with this sound map interface that's been set up for Voices of Nature this year as well. All right, I think I'll stop there. I may have gone a bit over time. Sorry about that.
No, that's totally fine, Leah. Very fascinating. So I would like to say thank you to Leah, and also thank you to Marion and James. I think the four of us have definitely given a nice overview of Earth jurisprudence, the world of acoustic ecology, the world of the arts, and our national exhibition, and the interaction between, I guess, the work that we do in AILA and the power and importance of creativity. So we've got about 20 minutes left for anyone who might like to ask questions or have a general discussion. We will be aiming to wrap up at 1:45, and I know that Leah will put in those sound links into the chat. So we're not offended at all if you want to jump off and use your last 20 minutes to listen to some amazing sound. But yes, if anyone has any questions, please either pop them in the chat box and I'll read them out, or you can just take your video, turn your video back on and wave to me, and we'll find you. So I'll give it a moment so people can have a think if they've got any questions. Yes, Roan.
Hello, can you hear me?
You're waving. Hello.
I had a question for Leah. Because I'm really interested in the acoustic ecology side of things, and I was wondering if Leah knew much about the Google Earth kind of style acoustic monitoring scheme that's been set up. Because yeah, I'm just really into it and always keen to know what cool is happening there. Yeah, no, I love that stuff.
Sure, yeah. The Google Earth style monitoring, did you say? Do you
Yeah,
mean the Acoustic Observatory project that's happening? Is that the one maybe?
yeah. I kind of, it was what I saw. It was like a 5-year project. I think where they set up a few microphones around the place and recorded them and just have them set up the whole time. But to me, that's just such an amazing thing because that gives us baseline data that we can then make predictions off.
Absolutely.
So I'm
Yeah.
just like holding out. In 5 years' time, I'm so excited because there's going to be so much cool data. But yeah.
Definitely. So there's multiple pretty incredible long durational projects that are happening across the planet at the moment. I mean, the Biosphere Soundscapes one I mentioned before is a project, you know, I've been involved with, which is doing those long duration recordings in UNESCO biosphere reserves across the planet. There's a large scale project running in Australia called the Acoustic Observatory, which I think is probably the 5-year one you were mentioning, which has got a fair bit of press over the last year or so, which is led by a group of scientists which are basically looking at creating this national acoustic observatory, which is initially 5 years of data. And what's exciting about that is it's all open source as well. So like you say, in 5 years' time, you know, artists across Australia are going to have access to this incredible repository of ecosystems. And quite fascinating with that project in that a lot of the installations happened in October and November last year. So just before we had, you know, one of our worst bushfire seasons ever. So we have these quite traumatic recordings in a way of environments just before the fires and then during the fires and after the fires as well. So quite powerful ways to engage with the impact that the fire season had on Australia too.
Yeah, definitely. And then one last little question is I'm really interested in linguistics and sort of animal communication. And it's kind of gone into, like, there's a scientific side of it and there's the acoustic side of it, and then there's also the interpreting side of it. And I think there's like a really cool sort of blend of like arts and interpretation and language and science. And I'm kind of reaching out to see like which people are kind of in that area, because I found people who are, you know, specialize in animal communication, but more in terms of the arts expression side of thing, I'm always reaching out for. So if there's anyone, especially here, that's into any of that, be sure to get in touch because I'm really fascinated in all that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can link you with a few people who are very involved in animal communication in Brisbane as well. And there's, you know, some prevalent international figures too, people like David Rothenberg, who have been, I guess, pioneering it from an artistic perspective, but very involved in the science of animal communication as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that would be great. Thanks a lot for that.
Excellent. Great questions. I'm sure everyone's interested in those. Got a few people saying they have to duck off. Thank you so much. Thank you, folks who have to leave. Were there any other questions for any of us? We are not at all if we can all leap off and have some lunch. Have a think if you've got any final questions. I'm going to do one last reminder of where you can find information about all of our lovely activities. So first of all, the Voices of Nature details about everything, including the National Exhibition in Brisbane, the wonderful launch of Ayla's first Earthwords and Artlings creative writing anthology, the gallery where some of you may be interested in popping your materials up onto. It can be photos of works, recordings of visual or audio, and how to get involved more generally. All of it found on our website, which is eartharts.org. If you're interested in the public lecture and workshop series, the Humanitics link can take you to a whole bunch of things. And we do actually have a few artists who may still be doing further activities in October and November, but you can find all of them there. And I can put that link in the chat. And I think the only other thing is to remind you that Ayla itself, the mothership of our websites, we have a number of different spaces for people to find wonderful things, but our main website is earthlaws.org.au. There we go. So, and the other bits and pieces connected to our Rights of Nature Week are the Earth Laws Asia Pacific Conference. It's really reasonable for 3 days. The ticket's only $50 for a normal human. If you're in government, we might charge you a bit more. We're going to have we're going to have a number of small arts experiences interwoven amongst discussions about rights of nature, developments from everything from arguments that the moon should have legal personhood, as it's facing down the escalating threat of corporate invasion and mining, to people talking about climate change, caring for country, and rights of ancestral beings from a First Nations point of view. So I think the conference will be of interest to lots of folks, not just lawyer types. But other than that, I'm certainly delighted that we've had the chance for this conversation today, and very happy to start wrapping up. Did Marion, James, or Leah, did you want to say any final remarks before we head off?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming and participating and putting in their contributions. And I think everyone together, it's a great thing.
Yeah, it's been really fun already, and we've barely kind of started to show off the lovely things people have been creating. But I've had a ball. But I always have a ball when I mix with lots of folks doing cool things. So, Leah or James, did you want to just say fare thee well?
I would, but I'd also, there's a quick question from Ria about asking Leah.
Thanks, James.
This could be interesting. Probably all of us, really. Deep listening to demonstrate the personhood of nature, but also the wisdom of nature, to bring it into the design and functioning of our political systems. So any thoughts, Leah? But I think we could all have a stab at that. But Leah?
Yeah, look, I mean, absolutely. I think that's what's sort of underpinning a lot of the work and research that people are really driving in acoustic ecology at the moment, that critical importance of thinking about these environments in very interdisciplinary ways in these approaches to recording, that it's almost essential that we are combining artistic perspectives, scientific perspectives, and First Nations perspectives. And I think that, you know, so much of the work that's been happening through, you know, the River Listening Project, for example, is really about, you know, and building on people like Anne Paulina's work as well in talking about, or building on all of that personhood of rivers and the incredible work that's been happening in places like New Zealand as well. And that it's, you know, by listening to these ecosystems, it does, you know, we're giving these environments agency, and, you know, you can't argue that that ecosystem doesn't have a very, you know, distinctive voice and an agency of its own. It was a somewhat vague answer, sorry, but
yeah.
Can I quickly add on that, just because I really enjoyed that. In terms of, like, for me, including sort of a multidisciplinary approach to it is, to me, trying to incorporate like different kinds of people. Like, some people will be more inclined to feel meaning with something visual, where other people are more moved by things which are auditory. And so I guess, to me, in the way I try to change politics and try to influence change in society is by helping form a healthy social identity, because what influences political decisions more than environmental concern, according to the papers that I've read, is political and social identities. So I guess the more that we can create an identity around valuing nature and personalize that, and we can personalize that by using different disciplines, then we can kind of impact people and influence people in a way that's kind of personal, and that, I think, has a cascading effect up into politics. So that's kind of my view on that, and I think you guys are right onto it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as the lawyer, I'd like to jump in and say, for everybody listening, please have a think about the word personhood, because what we've seen is the New Zealand eruption of a rights of nature or legal status approach to river recognition has emerged under very unique cultural context of the discussions between the Maori people and the government under the Treaty of Waitangi. And what they did was they latched onto the existing construct, and I'll say this in plain English, but I repeat myself. They've latched onto the existing construct of what we call legal personhood because that's what exists already in Western law for corporations. But a pure rights of nature approach that Thomas Berry would articulate, or a number of different First Nations peoples would not ever talk about personhood. Because as Thomas Berry said so beautifully, bees have bee rights, rivers have river rights, and trees have tree rights. Legally speaking, if you are in your community and you argue for legal personhood for your local river, you're saying it should have the same rights as a person. And I would say, as an earth advocate, it shouldn't. It should have the same rights as a river because it's much more expansive and it's primary. We don't want to see all of nature with its own legal personhood rights because it just becomes another stakeholder. What we need is a return to a culture that absolutely reveres and understands the living world as the source of all life and the foundation and the objective of our being and the interrelationship of all of that. So the legal personhood stuff is great so long as you're talking in abstract, but once you get into the actual arguments around what you should advocate for, please be careful. I'm trying to bang this drum as often as I can because I personally object to the idea that a river should be like a person or a legal corporation. You enter into some really problematic spaces. However, that said, the developments in the Whanganui River, the Urewera Forest, and the Taranaki Mountain have really excited and grown imaginations because, exactly as Rowan said, you can personalize it. But we're also trapped in our anthropocentric way of being. It's only if we imagine it as a person that we can really value it. Well, no, let's go better than that. Why can't you imagine it as a river? It's a river. And we belong to it. It owns us, you know, those kinds of ideas. So if you're interested in those kinds of issues, or if you're in a community that's really wanting to push for a greater protection and care for and reverence and respect for nature, there's a lot of different tools to do it. Please don't just lock onto that one. So there are, of course, other cultures that do see certain entities as, and they generically call it people, but Mary Graham, an amazing Kombu Mary elder, she and I are working together on a lot of things. We challenge this notion of personhood. We've been playing with designing our own language for it. She always refers to, you know, geckohood and lizardhood. So do have a think about all of those different ways we use language.
Yeah.
I think just to come back to the question that I was asking, yeah, absolutely. So the question was really about going beyond any notion of personhood, noting its limitations. And I think for me, and probably anyone who spends any time in nature, there's just such a sense of the eldership of nature. And this is certainly an Indigenous kind of ways of thinking in cosmology. And I'm someone who's worked a lot, you know, in government processes, and there's none of that. It's very hard to kind of contact that kind of flavor within those processes. And clearly, you know, in terms of, you know, my instincts is that's where we need to return to if we're to survive as a species. And so I guess that's what and I'll talk to Leah about this separately. But I'm really intrigued around, you know, what are the different pathways or ways of imagining, you know, the restoration of trees as elders in our political and legal and other kinds of decision making. Sure.
And as a wordsmith, the word elder is perfect because it doesn't actually imply a human. Like it. Anyway, there's a number of other... Yes, James.
Sorry, just for me wrapping up, just jumping off what Rory was saying as well, also the value of arts engagements is that it does have that very democratizing and inclusive capacity, particularly when, you know, you're working with people who, you know, that prefer to work with the spoken word or prefer to work visually or communicate more readily in those manners. And so it pulls it away from a lot of the Western textbook learning that goes on, and so we can engage in artistic practices that are very expressive, and there's some great examples of that happening, sort of using what are called boundary, like as a boundary object, where an artwork can become a third object in a negotiation between two parties, where they can both relate to this artwork and invest their own kind of language into it and then communicate through it. The arts practices have great flexibility and potential in this area.
Yeah, thank you, James. All right. Jeff White, I think your comment is a good one to wrap up on. Humans are not the only species on Earth, but most people act like it. Yes, we do. Hence that little diagram that I always wheel out, the human-centered approach. But as we know, even amongst our own species, we can treat each other very poorly and have huge demarcations between either justice or health, wealth, safety, etc. But look, on a closing note, I would like to really thank you all for your time. Obviously, folks like us who have been collaborating together are nothing without an audience and more friends to play with. So we're really grateful to you for giving up your lunch break to come and be with us. Really urge you to stay connected to the Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology. I'm sure Leah has got many of her articles available here and there, and do connect with Voices of Nature. The plan for us, at least, as James and I were brewing things up at the end of last year, and then with Marion as well, is to have Voices of Nature as our theme for the next couple of years. So we do the Rights of Nature Week as a biennial, every even year, 2020 and 2022. And you never know, by 2022, perhaps we'll all be able to run freely around the continent again, whether that's a good or bad thing, but we might at least be able to have more local art exhibitions. That would be lovely, and experiences. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Marion, Leah, James, and all of you. And hopefully we'll see you. Oh, quick plug. Andrew Skiok and I are doing a talk next week on the 15th in a lunch break. And Vivian Glantz has a few spaces left in her nature writing workshop on Saturday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. AEST. But get in quick. There's only 4 places left. So thank you so much, everybody. I should stop talking. All right. Fare thee well and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.